Catherine Delahunty.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I'd just like to take a brief call on this issue because it's an important issue for all people in this country. We used to come from a proud tradition, and that tradition was called full employment, and it was called housing for all. And we've lost that. And we've lost that so long ago that there's a whole generation of people who have no idea that it ever existed. And that's not something to be proud of. And part one of this bill is not something to be proud of either. The Green Party has a policy called Home for Life, which addresses part one, and there's three really excellent ideas in it. The idea of shared equity and progressive ownership, the idea of a warrant of fitness for rental properties, and secure tenancies. However, part one attacks secure tenancies in particular and certainly doesn't promote the positive ideas that we've come up with around the fact that we have a massive crisis, actually an epidemic, in shortages in homes. So this morning I saw, and the figures are bandied about, but this morning I saw on Twitter the New Zealand Initiative actually saying that we had a 95,000 home shortage in this country. So now is not the time to introduce more punitive measures towards state housing tenants, those that still have homes. In fact, it's the worst thing we could do. And we should be promoting genuine third sector housing relationships with iwi and community groups and working on ideas like shared equity and progressive ownership for the many, many, many families who are in crisis now. And we all pay. If you looked at this, Mr Chair, if we look at this purely from an economic perspective, which nothing is pure economics. Pure economics is one factor in life, but if we did, it's false economy to displace people and create more transience in our communities. It's false economy for people to be reviewed in their homes, made more insecure in their homes, or to be homeless. And rather than just creating the idea that the private sector, as some previous speaker said, will magically provide, why don't we get real? It's time to get real, and it's time to listen to groups like the Salvation Army who've done an excellent job. So, for example, what's wrong with reviewable tenancies? Well, I learned something from the previous speaker about this bill, which was that Work and Income, or MSD, is going to make some decision about who gets to get a state house. And what scares me about this, having worked with both Housing New Zealand and MSD, and what scares the Green Party is we are moving more and more into a punitive model in welfare, and it appears now the government has decided through this bill to move housing into a punitive model. And the idea that reviewable tenancies somehow will make for a fair or logical use of housing won't stack up. And to be honest, the MSD are not capable of running this kind of... they don't have the expertise, they don't have the commitment, and they're not being driven by government to regard this as a human right to housing. They're being driven by the idea that there's a fraud going on. It's similar to the welfare bashing. There's a fraud going on. There's the wrong people doing the wrong things in the wrong place, and they need to be monitored. They need to be audited. They need to be checked on. They need to be scapegoated, and then we will get somehow greater efficiency. Well, you know, for children living in houses where they don't know where they're going to be the next week, efficiency is not really the issue. Now, even in 10 years ago, when I was working in housing in Tairāwhiti, there were people, a grandmother with 7 children living in a 2-bedroom flat trying to get into a state house. And there was a list, but it was a struggle then. But how much worse would it be if you actually got there, if the person got there, and similar people to this woman, and then found they were going to be reviewed? Then found that they're not secure after the long battle to get out of the low priority C classification up to the A classification, even though you're looking after 8 children whose parents are in prison and you're a grandmother. The person finally gets there, only to find now that it's back to work and income. And it's a sad thing to say about the welfare system, that it's now punitive and sanctioning. But it's a sad thing, even more of a sad thing, to see this being applied to the Housing New Zealand situation. It's actually going to create even more harm. Someone else referred to this like musical chairs. I believe Sue Moroney said it's like a game of musical chairs with a shortage of chairs. I actually think this is more like a bad Monopoly game where the state houses are no longer on the board. So there is Park Lane for some people, but some other people don't even get to the board. On that board, in the glorious capitalist paradise that we supposedly live in, the very least we could do is have some state houses. The very least we could do is own the fact that the state has a strong role in building third sector housing with partners such as iwi and community groups, but not through reducing people's access to secure tenancy. And that's what's so offensive about part one of this bill.
Clear, Karen.
Mr. Chair, Norman Kirk once famously said that